and it came with all of these different pieces of paper that I had to print to create my pattern piece. So I've kind of lined them up a little bit. We have these two that go together. You can see these two go together, as well as this being what makes this come together. So we're going to take our paper scissors and we're going to cut out the pattern and tape it together. And now I'm going to match the circles. Okay, we have our pattern pieces made. Now we can use them. So we're going to look at the pattern instructions to see how many pieces we need to cut out of each fabric. Whenever you purchase fabric from the store, you buy it folded in half on a bolt, a cardboard piece. So see how this is folded in half? This was wrapped on a bolt like this. So I've unwrapped it, I left it folded in half. When we sew, we want to think about grain. Grain is the direction of the threads that run lengthwise. Essentially should be woven like this, vertically and horizontally, so they connect to each other with 90-degree angles. So that should be all over this entire fabric. If your fabric does not have 90-degree angles as far as the threads, the direction that they run, let's say it's kind of like this instead, well, that means that your fabric is off grain. Off grain fabric likes to twist and turn around your body as you're wearing it. If this is an article of clothing, it doesn't lie flat. It's not perfect. So to tell if your fabric is off grain, you're going to fold it in half, matching at the very top. This woven edge right here, this is your selvage. This right here is the cut edge, the side that they cut at the Joann Fabrics. This is the fold. So we're folding it in half, matching our selvages at the top. And if this, after making one thread go all the way down the side of your fabric, so I would make this perfect, cut this and create just one thread that goes all the way down the side of this fabric. If these all match up perfectly, you know you're grain perfect. Now, quite often we get lazy as sewers, and we don't mess with taking one thread and removing it all the way down the side of the fabric so that we can see if it's grain perfect. For the most part, if you fold your fabric in half and you don't have any bubbling here at the fold, then your fabric is on grain. And for the most part, it's generally on grain enough. Now, if it's really off grain, you can take your fabric and stretch it on a 45-degree angle across the bias and push it back onto grain and make it nice and flat again. So you can fix a fabric. Now, most patterns have grain lines. This pattern that I bought off Craftsy, as nice as it seems, it doesn't have a grain line on it. So essentially a grain line would be an arrow that is double-sided. It would look like this. I would measure from the selvage all the way to this arrow on this side, from the selvage all the way to the arrow on this side, and I would make it parallel with measuring my arrow that is just hand drawn and I'm sure not accurately drawn. So we're gonna go with 16.5 inches at the bottom here. So now I'm going to make this 16.5 inches as well. See how I have to move that? Okay, so we have our grain. Technically, I should do it from an arrow if we had an arrow. Okay, so whenever I pin something, pretend I've pinned it here because that would be where the grain should be. I then pin my corners next. Make it nice and flat, and then pin it with the needle, the sharp point, facing the corner. Sharp point faces the corner, sharp point faces the corner. There we go, nice and flat. When you cut out your pattern piece, you want it to be perfect. If you are not perfect, then this pattern shape will not be what you cut out. It'll be some odd shape that's not going to fit with the other pattern pieces. So you want to cut out as accurately as possible. Now I'm going to take my pins and pin every 3 fingers. So I'd pin about here next. I'd pin about here next. For the most part, you can eyeball your 3 fingers. Now, you'll see that I put the pointed edge towards the cut line wherever I'm putting my pins. If I put it like this, it changes the shape of the pattern piece. See how that's all ruffled? That's not accurate. We don't want to be inaccurate. So I'm going to point my pointy side of my needle to the line that I'm going to cut on. I like to pretend these are street lights, and this is the light, this is the ground. So if my light is facing this direction, well, my street light fell over. I want to know what happened to it. So make sure your street lights are always standing. Pattern on my right and my extra on the left. I find that I cut more accurately that way. You want to be as perfect as you can. Again, perfection is key to make sure your pattern pieces are going to fit together right. Now when you cut, you want to make sure that your scissors are on the counter. These scissors are designed to cut against the counter. See how they're angled? They cut against the counter. So you don't want to lift your pattern piece up into the air because it's not going to be accurate. So keep it down on the counter. We don't need to cut out 2 pieces, we only need to cut out 1. So I'm going to open this up and not fleece interfacing. This is actually batting for quilting. So it'll still work the same in the sense that it'll provide some thickness. A lot of battings are a lot thicker than this. So I'm going to use this because I don't have fleece interfacing right now. This will suffice. You don't have to worry about grain line with this. There is no grain. You can see that this doesn't have any threads. It's just made up of fuzz. So just start pinning it, but pin it the way I've instructed you, with the corners first, the sharp point of the pin facing the cutting line. We're going to cut out 2 of these.
And we'll attach it between the layers. I will probably end up quilting this so that it will stick to my fabric, seeing as this is not too big, there's no way that I can put it on the fabric. So this will look like later intensive, but it will still give me the same effect, so I'm going to find out what to do. So we can't see really, depending on the pattern instructions to put this together, we can put our pin together. We can also get it and have us the lining separate, so that it's still the same.
Alright, this is a quilting mat here. It has lines on it in 1-inch increments. Each square is 1 inch, and it helps when you're quilting to cut out your fabric accurately. Now generally when I am using this mat, I line up my fabric and I put my quilting mat with one of the lines, and I usually have what looks like a pizza cutter. It's called a rotary cutter, and it just slices this off. Now today, because of the fact that I have forgotten my rotary cutter at the high school that I work at, I will not be able to use the rotary cutter. So we're going to do this by hand with a pen and scissors. So I apologize for not having the right tools, but just like we were versatile before when I didn't have the correct fabric, we're going to be versatile right now and use something that will work just as well, just not as quickly. So I'm cutting off the selvage. I don't want the selvage as part of my fabric that I'm using for my straps. We have a nice straight line now that we can go off of. I'm going to take my fabric, I'm going to fold it, in half, matching my selvage. This is a selvage end that doesn't look as ugly as this one, so we're keeping that one. Matching my selvage with my now cut fabric. I'm going to fold it again. This is going to be our straight line that we're going to guide off of, and we're going to just cut off any excess fabric that is uneven. We need this to be 4 inches wide. Thankfully this ruler is 4 inches wide. Now if I had this wonderful rotary cutter, I'd just simply cut this. I'd be cutting it right now. It'd be done in seconds. Instead, I will not be able to cut it until I'm done drawing my lines. I'm making this line here because this is going to be our first strap. It needs to be 4 inches wide, and since this ruler is 4 inches wide, well, this is going to work for us. I'm also going to draw the line for my next strap since it also is going to be 4 inches wide. And I'm going to cut all 3 of these at the same time. Now the reason I folded this a few times was because my ruler is not very long. It would not have cut all of the fabric or measured all of the fabric at once. So this is kind of a trick to get you to be able to measure and cut all of it at once and simply and easily. So even though I don't have the right tool for the job, I'm still doing the job the same way that I would, minus cutting it nice and easily. Look how beautiful that is. There we go. We have 2 straps. Now the pattern says that it needs to be 22 inches long, and right now if I'm measuring this, let's see, in half, this is definitely more than 22 inches long. So for right now I'm going to keep it the length that it is because hey, maybe I want my straps to be longer. Maybe I like a longer strap. So I will decide to cut these shorter later when I am finished making my bag. That can happen. That's the nice thing about sewing. You can customize it to meet your needs. If I just wanted a hand strap, I could make it just this long, which is not 22 inches. So you can do what you want with sewing for the most part. now that we've finished all of our quilting, is to do our straps. So we're going to take this and we're going to fold it ironed in half. So since this is 4 inches, we are going to end up with 1 inch wide straps. So fold it in half and iron it. This is a step that often gets confused by beginning sewers when you're just reading the pattern instructions. So it's easier to see this in the video. Basically, the point of this line that we are creating, or the point of this fold, is to create a line to guide us. So the next step is going to be to take this side and fold it to that line we just made, and then fold it in half again. So we'll have a 1 inch strap. So I'll show you that. So take this and fold it all the way up, the raw edge all the way up to that center line the iron just created. You don't want to go past the line, because when we go to fold this in just a second, if you've gone past the line, you've created too much bulk and you won't be able to fold it. Okay, so we have one side folded. Now we're going to do the other. I flipped it around because it's easier for me to iron this direction. Same exact thing that we just did. To the center fold, or technically, now that we've already have one side folded, to the raw edge of the piece of fabric above it. Very simple. It's not hard to sew. You just have to know what you're doing. All right. There we go. Now that we have these two folded and ironed, I'm going to fold it one more time so that it is closed, and I'm going to iron it all the way down in half to make my 1 inch strap. This is going to make it so that I can sew with an edge stitch right here on this open edge, and we'll be able to sew without having to use pins to secure it. It's faster this way. It's easier. Okay. One strap down, one to go. Again, I can cut this shorter after I'm finished with my straps.
Don't have to make that decision now.
edges on this end as well. We're going to do the same thing with the other pattern piece. Now the pattern suggests that we sew this on right now, and then we're going to take it and sew it to this piece here. But I'm going to skip that step and I'm going to sew it all together at the same time. So I'm going to take this here and I'm going to line up this edge. See how this is in the center here. I'm going to line up these edges that match each other. I'm going to pin them together. There we go. See? I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So right here. So these are in the center here. And you're matching up this edge right here. So your two small pieces go to your one big piece, and you match up the edges that look the same as each other. And because of the fact that I didn't sew on my straps already, when I'm going to sew this seam allowance, I'm going to give it a little bit of reinforcement with back stitching as I go, so that the straps won't fall out of it or break off of it. We're going to sew this with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, which is the edge of my presser foot. Go ahead and back stitch it, and then sew all the way across the edge of your back or your presser foot. Now I'm on a strap right now, so I'm going to do a little bit of back stitching right here because I can tell this is the edge of my strap. Now I'm going to go forward. I'm at the other edge. I'm going to do some back stitching. This is really going to reinforce that strap so that it does not try to pull out of the bag. Now keep going to the other strap. Alright, we are on a strap, so we're going to do some back stitching. All at 1/4, which again is the edge of your presser foot. Do some more back stitching at the other side of the strap and all the way to the end and back stitch. Here we go. We have our 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now now you're going to take all your pins out. Make sure you get the interior pins that are holding on your straps out as well, because you're going to serge across this. The serger has a blade here and it cuts the material as it goes. Now I'm going to just run my fabric along the blade and not cut anything off. But if you had a pin still in here, the blade would cut through the pin and you would ruin the machine. So make sure you don't have any pins left in your fabric. So you're just going to run across this edge without really cutting anything off. I have just little scraps here because I'm just trying to give this a finished edge. I'm not trying to serge and cut the fabric. So just cutting the tiniest bit. See, as you can see, I didn't get close enough to my line of stitching where I'm cutting fabric off. I just want to bind this edge. So anytime you sew a seam, you want to press it, and you want to try to press it so that the seam is as flat as you can. Generally, we sew our seams so that you can press them from the other side, but because this has the batting on it, it cannot be pressed from the other side. We'd melt it. So we're going to press this nice and flat. I'm going to press the straps going this direction, seeing as that's what's going to happen eventually. Nice and flat. See how this is as open as it can be? You want it to be open. You don't want it to be bubbled. Bubbled looks homemade. See that? Not bubbled. All right, so I have a 20-inch, you can see a 20-inch polyester all-purpose zipper. It is black. I chose black because it matches nicely. You want to choose a zipper that's longer than your project. Personally, I enjoy a longer zipper because I'll cut it down to the right size. You just have to be careful when you have a longer zipper that you don't accidentally cut it down to the point where you're cutting the toggle off somehow. But I'll show you how to do this so that you are safe with your zipper. So you're going to line up this edge right here with the edge of the zipper. You're going to have excess on either side. It makes the zipper so simple to sew because you're not having to sew past a toggle with your sewing machine because it's off the zipper. And we're going to sew right next to the zipper all the way down. Honestly, because of the fact that I don't have a toggle to sew past, I don't really need a zipper foot for this. So I'll show you how that works. I am going to put this machine needle in the center instead of to the left. That way I can guide with the zipper right next to this piece of my presser foot so that I get a nice close zipper. Then I'm going to change my stitch length to 3. I prefer a 3 because it's easier to take out if something happens. Take the pins out. Clip your strings. And now you need to test the zipper. If the zipper does not work, that means we got too close to it with our stitching and we're gonna have to re-sew it. So open up the zipper. There we go. You can see we have a pretty perfect zipper here. So now we're going to do the same thing on the other side. Literally, we're just gonna take this other side and bring it all the way up here to meet the other side, the side we just sewed. You want to match up your edge here and your edge right here, and you want to match up this cut edge with the edge of your zipper, just like we did on the other side. I'm securing it with some pins here at the edge underneath, securing it at the edge here underneath, just so that we can get this in the right spot. And then I'm going to switch over to looking at it from the front of the zipper. Take a look. I just flipped it over so I can pin it from above because I'm sewing it from above. I'm not sewing it from this side. So now I can transfer this over and pin it all the way down the length of the zipper. we go. We're pinned. Now we're going to sew it the exact same way we sewed the other side. Do a few forward. Now sew a few backwards. Now go forwards again. Stitch and clip our threads.
Take your pins out. Clip your threads. You don't want any threads in your zipper because they can get caught in the zipper and then cause the zipper not to be able to move. So we're just going to trim up all these threads that I have here from my quilting lines. You always trim up all of your threads anyways as you go because a project with lots of threads is a messy project, and messy projects are not ideal. You know, not gonna lie, I hate threads. There we go. Okay, so
Now we're going to test the zipper again to make sure it is going to zip. I'm going to turn this right side out.
there we go.
And let's take a look. Very good. Now my next step is always to top stitch the zipper. I personally like a zipper that isn't trying to come this way. Top stitching, which is a stitch that's just right here all the way down, is going to hold this flap of the zipper down. I just have to check the instructions to make sure the lining is not added right here, because then I can't top stitch it yet. I'd have to wait till the lining is added to. Alright, so we're pinning up the side with it folded next to the zipper all the way across both sides so that we can do our top stitch. When you go to top stitch this, make sure you don't sew too close to the zipper, because if you sew too close to the zipper, this toggle can't get past it. So you want to be about right there, so kind of about 1/4 of an inch away, but you still want to hit the tape on the other side. If you don't catch the tape on the other side, then your zipper is not going to be held down.
By the pins. Turn this around and do this on the other side.
Like I said before, you want to make sure you're not too close to the zipper, but you don't want to be too far away. When I top stitch, I change the stitch length to 4. Okay. Do a little back stitch. Not crazy, just a little. And now you're just going to sew next to the zipper, but not too close. Back stitch. Take a look. See how close that is? It's going to let the zipper move past that without getting caught on the stitching. Zip up your pouch, turn it inside out. Shove the straps inside. And pin this top edge here, making sure you match. So we're gonna pin here at the very edge. And then I'm gonna pin at this edge right here. I'm gonna unzip this now because if it zipped up, you're not ever gonna be able to get this back. Coming from the inside on the other side. Unzip it at least halfway. That way you'll be able to unzip it even more after the lining has been put in. So continue pinning this. All right, we have one side pinned. Now let's turn this over and go to the other side. Now, sew all the way down the seam. Okay, now that I've gone over the zipper toggle, I want to go over the zipper again just a little bit. I'm not going crazy with it because I don't want to break the needle. But we're just going to secure it a little bit more so it's not going to want to fall apart eventually, because the zipper is a very weak spot since you pull on it all the time. So it's really easy to make a zipper seam come apart. Now a little back stitch. Your pins. Trim your strings. Trim your zipper. It's okay to trim your zipper now because it is finished. It has the stitching to protect the toggle from coming off. All right, so now we're going to go across this with the serge stitch again so that it matches this. That way it's just not going to fray. I'm not going to cut anything off again. All right, I serged this end of the bag, both ends of the bag actually. So now I'm cutting my strings. And now we're gonna put our corners together and sew them. So take your corners, see that? I have a corner like this. I'm gonna hold on to it by both ends and I'm gonna make these two meet right here. Then I'm gonna turn it and I'm going to pin it together. So I'm going to take this seam allowance and push it this way and take the one underneath and push it this way so it's not too bulky, and I'm going to pin it. We're going to do this to both corners, pin it from edge to edge, so I guess fold to fold technically. We're going to do all four corners, then we're going to sew it 1/2 inch and then we're going to serge it. And again, I'm going to just do this and come back to you since I I'm pretty sure you guys have the idea now that you don't have to see me sew every single seam together. So 1/2 inch. All right, take out your pins and clip your strings. I sewed with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and I made sure to back stitch when I stopped and when I started. Always reinforce that seam so it doesn't fall apart. And just as a reminder, a seam allowance is the distance that the fabric is sewn from the edge. So this distance from here to here is 1/2 inch. And there are markings on the machine that show you where 1/2 inch seam allowance is. So now we can take our bag, unzip it more, and we can turn it right side out. It's almost done. We just have to add a lining to it. So what I would like for you to do next is actually to serge this. Same thing we've been doing without cutting off. So serge all 4 corners, and then you're going to go to the iron and you're going to press your corners so that they're nice and flat on this side and folded, just like we have been pressing everything. Again, I'm not going to show this to you this time because I feel like you can just follow that instruction. All right, you can see that I've serged my seams for my corners, and I have also just pressed all of my corners so they're nice and crisp. See how it stands so nicely now? So you'll want to take your fabric and you're just gonna fold it sideways like this. I just folded it sideways like that, and I pressed it just at the very edge to just get nice little crispness. So now we are going to move on to our lining, which is the last step of the bag. The first step of the lining is to fold it 1/4 of an inch. So you're going to take a seam gauge and you're just going to fold it 1/4 all the way across. This is a seam gauge. The slider helps put it on the measurement that we would like to keep it at, and we're going to go with 1/4 down here, which is technically the second line in. This is the first line, but you can't see it because there's a little hole right there, and then this is the second one. So 1/2 inch is right here, so it's 1/2 of a 1/2 inch. So we're going to take this right here and we're going to measure our seam like that all the way up. So we're going to, and since mine doesn't work, I'm just gonna eyeball this because my slider doesn't stay where it's supposed to go. So I'm just gonna have to look at the 1/4 line myself every single time I go to use it. Are putting this together just like we did the outside, where we had to take this piece here, put right sides together and match it up to that bottom piece. And you're going to pin it here and you're going to sew it at 1/2 inch, and then we're going to serge it. We'll do the same thing on the other side. See, it's nice and easy because we've already done this. We already know how to do this. So it's just a matter of repeating the steps that we've already done. So turn this around. I'm going to take my other front piece, put right sides together. If you ever see instructions written out, right sides is abbreviated RS and wrong sides WS. Seam allowance is SA. So again, this is going to be sewn with actually, I lied to you. It's going to be sewn with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I forgot that's what we sewed it with before. Sorry. Sew this with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So 1/4 here, make sure you back stitch, and 1/4 here. Make sure you back stitch, and also you're going to serge. So I'm going to go do this and come back to you. So now we're going to trim our strings. I sewed with my 1/4 inch seam allowance. I back stitched. I'm trimming my strings. And then what do you think I'm going to do next? What makes my project look professional? All right, well, if you said iron the seam flat, you are correct. So I'm going to go do that. I will be back. All right, so we are perfectly flat here. So now we look professional instead of homemade. I'm going to take this and I'm going to put right sides together, pretend like I have a zipper here, even though I don't. And I'm going to match up my corners, or my 2 corners again, or I guess these aren't really corners, my sides. Matching up my sides. And I'm going to pin them. This time I'm going to use 1/2 inch. And now I'm going to do the other side. Again, we've already done this, so it's simple. Okay, so I'm going to sew across this at 1/2 inch. I do have my sew with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, just like we did the outside of the fabric, on both ends. And then we are going to make sure we back stitch, 1/2 inch seam allowance. I'm going to serge it, and I'm also going to iron it. So I'll go do that and come on back. All right, so I've already pinned 1 corner together. Now you're going to take your corners. Again, you're going to just open this up, put your 2 seam allowances in the center together. Make sure one's facing this to the left and one's facing to the right so that you don't have too much bulk. You're going to pin it and pin all the way across the corner. And then you're going to sew it at a 1/2 inch seam allowance, all 4 corners. Make sure you back stitch. Then you're going to serge, and then you're going to press. That is it for the corners. Then we're going to insert this into the bag and do some sewing, and then we are done with this project. All right, we are finished. We have the entire lining sewn together. So we're going to grab our exterior bag again, and we are going to take our lining and shove it inside our bag. So I'm going to match it at the bottom and the corners. I'm going to match it on this bottom in the corner, and then I'm going to take my zippered area and I'm going to put my lining right on top of that pink, that original line of stitching, because this is my top stitched. So this closer stitch is the first stitch and this is your top stitch the further away. So I want to put it right under the close stitch so that when I sew on top of my top stitch, it's going to catch my fabric. So do that, pin it in this corner here, putting it on top of the pink stitching and pinning it. Make it on top of the pink and pin. This is probably the hardest part of the bag, but it's really not that difficult. Once you have the entire thing pinned, you're going to start here and sew on top of your line of stitching. This is called stitching in the ditch. That way it makes it look like you only stitched it once. So sew on top of this line of stitching all the way across until you get to the very end. If you can't make it all the way down to the end because it's just too much bulk for your sewing machine to get through, that's okay. You can hand sew this. Once you're done with that, your bag is complete. Both sides. My bag is complete. I've stitched on top of the top stitching, stitching in the ditch. So I don't need to worry about my zipper anymore. It is completely finished. Notice how it zips so nicely. It's because I sewed it on top of this stitching and not on this pink line. The pink line would have made it so this would have been too close for the zipper. Then the other thing that I plan to do is, you can see that I have a pin right here on this corner. I have a pin right here in the center on the seam. I have a pin here in this corner also. I'm going to take this and just do a little bit of sewing right here in this ditch, inside this crevice. I'm going to sew in this crevice. I'm going to sew in this crevice and do that on all of the corners and the center seams, just because it's going to help my lining stay inside the bag better. It kind of annoys me when your lining doesn't stay inside of your bag, and when you're only attaching the lining from the zipper, it's going to want to pull out with your hand with the stuff that you're pulling out of it. So the pattern does not tell me to do this, but I know from personal experience making many bags in the past that it is something that should be done. So we're adding this to my personal instructions.